in interacting with the President of the United States or anybody in his administration. I have never been pressured. I have never felt pressure to intervene or interfere in any way and shaping intelligence in a political way or in relationship to an ongoing investigation.
All I'd say, Director Coates, is there was a chance here to lay to rest some of these press reports. If the President is asking you to intervene or downplay, you may not have felt pressure, but if he is even asking, to me that is a very relevant piece of information. And again, at least in terms of the conversation with Admiral Rogers, I think we will get at least some, another individual's version, but at some point these facts have to come out. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Risch.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator Coates, excuse me, Director Coates and Admiral Rogers for your testimony. And with all due respect to my colleague from Virginia, I think you have cleared up substantially your direct testimony that you have never been pressured by anyone, including the President of the United States, to do something illegal, immoral, or anything else. Thank you for that. Let's go back to Section 702, which is what this hearing was supposed to be all about. It's becoming patently obvious, I think, that those of us that work in the intelligence community, that we're in a different position than Europe is. Europe is their risks are obviously very high, and they're suffering these attacks on a very regular basis and becoming more regular. So let's talk about our collection efforts versus the European collection efforts, and particularly as it relates to Section 702. And obviously, we hear in the media frequently about spats between us and the Europeans regarding intelligence matters, but we all know that there is a robust communication and cooperation between our European friends and ourselves. So I want to talk about it I want to talk about 702 in that respect. Why don't we start, Director Coates, with you, and then I'll throw it up for anybody else that wants to comment on this. How important is 702, the continuation of Section 702 and its related parts, to doing what we have been doing as far as helping the Europeans and the Europeans helping us, and doing the things that we're doing here in America to see that we don't have the kind of situations that have been recently happening in Europe. Director Coates, start with you.
Well, having just returned a few weeks ago from major capitals in Europe and discussing this very issue with my counterparts throughout the intelligence communities of these various countries, they voluntarily, before I could even ask the question, expressed extreme gratitude for the ability, for the information we have been able to share with them relative to threats. Numerous threats have been avoided on the basis of collection that we have received through 702 authorities and our notification of them of these impending threats, and they have been deterred or intercepted. Unfortunately, what has happened just recently, particularly in England, shows that regardless of how good we are, there are bad actors out there that have bypassed the more concentrated large attack efforts and taken it either through inspiration or direction from ISIS or other terrorist groups, have chosen to take violent action against the citizens of those countries. The purpose of the trip was to ensure them that we would continue to work and share together. Their collection activities, capabilities, in many cases are good, but in some cases lack the ability that we have. And so this ability to share information with them that helps keep their people safe also is highly valued by them. But I don't think we should take for granted that just because Europe has been the recent target of these attacks, that the United States is safe from that. We know through intelligence that there's plotting going on, and we know that there's lone wolf issues and individuals that are taking instructions from ISIS through social media or that for whatever reason are copycatting what is happening. And so that threat exists here also. And let me lastly say that the nations I've talked to, many of which have been extremely concerned about violating privacy rights, have initiated new procedures and legislation and mandates relative to giving the intelligence agencies better collection because they think they need it to protect their citizens.
Thank you very much. In just a few seconds that I've got left, Mr. Rosenstein, could you tell me, please, we get a lot of pushback from the privacy people. And we've now heard testimony that there's been no intentional violation over the 10 years. Could you tell the American people what's in store for someone who these guys catch intentionally misusing 702, since you're the highest ranking member of the Department of Justice here?
Yes, Senator. I can assure you, Senator, that in the Department of Justice, we treat with great seriousness any allegations of violations regarding classified information. So if there were a credible allegation that someone had willfully violated Section 702 in a way that was in violation of a criminal law, we would investigate that case, and if prosecution were justified, we would prosecute it. I know Director McCabe shares with me that commitment. We recognize that we have an obligation to the American people to make sure that these authorities are used appropriately and responsibly, that we comply with the Constitution and the laws and the procedures, and we're committed to devote whatever resources are required to make sure that if there are willful violations, people are held accountable for them.
And this is your commitment and the Department of Justice's commitment to the American people?
That's correct.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenstein. Thank you, Mr.
Senator Feinstein.
Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of comments on Section 702. It's a program that I support. It's a program that I believe has worked well. It's a big program. It's an important one. It is a content collection program involving both internet and phone communications. So it can raise concerns about privacy and civil liberties. In the year 2016, there were 106,469 authorized targets out of 3 billion internet users. That's the ratio. The question of unmasking has been raised. It's my understanding that 1,939 U.S. person identities were unmasked in 2016 based on collection that occurred under Section 702. So my question is going to be the following, and I'll ask it all together, and hopefully you'll answer it. I would like a description of the certification process and the use of an amicus. I would like your response to the fact that the question, the program sunsets after 5 years, about raising that sunset versus no sunset because of the privacy concerns. It's my belief there should be a sunset. And the use of an amicus, which is currently used as part of the certification process, and whether that should be continued and formalized. So, Admiral, it's programs under your auspices.
I could, if I could. DOJ is going to be smarter on the amicus piece.
Okay.
Please, will you take that piece and I'll...
I'm not sure I am smarter on the amicus piece, Senator. I can tell you this, though, that with regard to the question of unmasking, this is actually primarily a question not for the Department. The determination is made by the intelligence agencies. If there is a situation where a foreign person has been communicating about an American person, and a decision is made whether or not the identity of that American person is necessary in order for that intelligence to be properly used. I think what's important for people to recognize, Senator, is that's an internal issue. That is, that unmasking is done internally, within the cloak of confidentiality within the intelligence community. That's a different issue from leaks. In other words, if somebody's identity is disclosed internally because it's relevant for intelligence purposes, because that's the goal of this collection, is to understand.
Mr. Rosenstein, let me just tell you, I just listened to somebody who should have known better talking about unmasking in a political sense, that it's done politically. And that, of course, is not the case. And so what I'm looking for is the definition of how this is done and under what circumstances.
And I think, Senator, that because that's really a decision made by the IC, the Intelligence Committee, not by the Department, it would be appropriate for them to respond to that.
I can do that. So with respect to unmasking, the following criteria is applied. First, for the National Security Agency, we define in writing who has the authority to unmask a U.S. person identity. That is 20 individuals in 12 different positions. I am one of the 20 in one of those 12 positions, the director. Secondly, we outline in writing what are the criteria that will be applied to a request to unmask. In a report, and again, part of our process under 702 to protect the identity of U.S. persons as part of our minimization procedures, when we think we need to reference a U.S. person in a report, we will not use a name. We will not use an identity. We say U.S. person 1, U.S. person 2, U.S. person 3. That report is then promulgated. Some of the recipients of that report will sometimes come back to us and say, I'm trying to understand what I am reading. Could you help me understand who is person 1 or who is person 2, etc.? We apply 2 criteria in response to their request. Number 1, you must make the request in writing. Number 2, the request must be made on the basis of your official duties, not the fact that you just find this report really interesting and you're just curious. It has to tangibly tie to your job. And then finally, I said too, but there's a third criterion, and that is the basis of the request must be that you need this identity to understand the intelligence you're reading. We apply those 3 criteria. We do it in writing, and one of those 20 individuals then agrees or disagrees. And if we unmask, we go back to that entity who requested it, not every individual who received the report, but that one entity who asked for us. We then provide them the U.S. identity, and we also remind them the classification of this report and the sensitivity of that identity remains in place. By revealing this U.S. person to you, we are doing it to help you understand the intelligence, not so that you can use that knowledge indiscriminately. It must remain appropriately protected.
Thank you.
And Senator, if I could just add something to that. Given the nature of this issue, and it's a legitimate question that you've asked, I've talked with my colleagues at NSA and CIA, FBI, and so forth, and suggesting that we might ask our civil liberties and privacy protection agencies to take a look at this, to see if Edward Rogers laid out the procedures. Are these the right procedures? Should we be doing something different? Would they have recommendations that better protected people from misuse of this? And they've all agreed to do that. So I think it's a legitimate issue to follow up on. I've talked to the agency heads about doing so, and they're willing to do it.
And if I could, I also have an internal review that I have directed. Given all the attention, given the focus, let's step back, let's reassess it, and let's ask ourselves, is there anything that would suggest we need to do something different in the process?
Good. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I'd like to more thoroughly answer the first question the Senator asked, which is, Senator Feinstein, my understanding is that an amicus was used in 2015. And that decision was made by the court. It's the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, which has the statutory authority, if the court believes it's appropriate in a particular case, to appoint an amicus. So my understanding is that that was done in 2015. Thank you.
Well, would you feel it would be helpful to make it a part of the regular certification process?
Well, my understanding, Senator, is that the statute permits the court to do it if the court believes it's appropriate. So I believe the court has that authority, and I'd leave it to the judges to decide when it's appropriate to exercise that.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr.
Senator Rubio.
Thank you all for being here. I understand fully the need of the President of the United States to be able to have conversations with members of the intelligence community that are protected, particularly in a classified setting. I also understand that the ability of this community to function depends both on its credibility, that its work that it's doing is in the national security interest of the United States, and also the importance of its independence, that it is not an extension of politics no matter which administration is at play. In the absence of either one of those two things, impacts everything we do, including this debate we're having here today. And the challenge that we have now is that while the folks here with us this morning are constrained in what they can say, there are people that apparently work for you that are not, and are constantly speaking to the media about things and saying things. And it puts the Congress in a very difficult position, because the issue of oversight on both your independence and on your credibility falls on us. And I actually think if what is being said to the media is untrue, then it is unfair to the President of the United States. And if it is, then it is true that it is something the American people deserve to know, and we, as an oversight committee, need to know in order to conduct our job. And so my questions are geared to Director Coates and Admiral Rogers. You have testified that you have never felt pressured or threatened by the President or by anyone to influence any ongoing investigation by the FBI. Are you prepared to say that you have never felt that you've never been asked by the President or the White House to influence an ongoing investigation?
Well, Senator, I just hate to keep repeating this, but I'm going to do it. I am willing to come before the committee and tell you what I know and what I don't know. What I'm not willing to do is to share what I think is confidential information that ought to be protected in an open hearing. And so I'm not prepared to answer your question today.
Director Coates, I would just say, and with incredible respect that I have for you, I am not asking for classified information. I am asking whether or not you have ever been asked by anyone to influence an ongoing investigation.
I understand, but I'm just not going to go down that road in a public forum. And I also was asked the question if the special prosecutor called upon me to meet with him to ask his questions. I said I would be willing to do that.
I likewise stand by my previous comment.
Okay, well then, in the interest of time, let me ask both of you, has anyone ever asked you, now or in the past, this administration or any administration, to issue a statement that you knew to be false?
For me, I stand by my previous statement. I've never been directed to do anything in the course of my 3+ years as the Director of the National
Not
Security
directed,
Agency
asked.
that I felt to be inappropriate, nor have I felt pressure to do so.
Have you ever been asked to say something that isn't true?
I stand by my previous statement, sir.
Director Coates?
I do likewise.
Well, let me ask this of everyone on this panel. Is anyone aware of any effort by anyone in the White House or elsewhere to seek advice on how to influence any investigation?
My answer is absolutely no, Senator.
No one has anything to add to that.
I don't understand the question.
The question is, are you aware of any efforts by anyone in the White House or the executive branch looking for advice from other members of the intelligence community about how to potentially influence an investigation?
Are you talking about me? No.
No.
Okay. Who wants to answer? I'm sorry.
I'm not sure I understand the question, but if you're asking whether I'm aware of requests to other people in the intelligence community, I am not.
Seeking advice on how we could potentially influence someone. You're not aware of anyone ever saying or reporting that to you?
No, sir.
Has anyone ever come forward and said, I just got a call from someone at the White House asking me what is the best way to influence someone on an investigation?
I've never received anything.
I have no direct knowledge of such a call.
There's an allegation made in one of the press reports, and that's why I asked. On a separate topic, I'm sorry. Who does? Mr. Rosenstein?
Our confusion, Senator, we just want to make sure we're clear on the question. The answer is no, as I understand it, but I'm not sure I'm familiar with the particular media report that you're referring to.
All right, I'm running out of time. I do want to ask this because this is important. Did the NSA routinely and extensively and repeatedly violate the rules that were put in place in 2011 to minimize the risk of collection of upstream information?
Have we had compliance incidents? Yes. Have we reported every one of those to the court? Yes. Have we reported those to our congressional oversight in Congress? Yes. Have we reported those to the Department of Justice and the Director of National Intelligence? Yes.
Did, under the Obama administration, was there a significant uptick in efforts and incidents of unmasking from 2012 to 2016?
I don't know that. I have to take that for the
Who would
record.
know that?
To be honest.
That you may have had with the president. My question is a little different. Did any of you four write memos, take notes, or otherwise record yours or anyone else's interactions with the president related to the Russia investigation?
I don't take any notes.
Let's go. Let's just get the four of you on the record.
Senator, I rarely take notes. I've actually taken a few today. But I am not going to answer questions concerning the Russia investigation. I think it's important for you to understand.
Not on whether you wrote a memo.
I'm not going to answer any questions,
Okay.
Senator, about the
My
Russian.
time's going to be short. Whether you wrote a memo, notes, anything.
I also am not going to comment on any conversations I may have had or notes taken or not taken relative to the Russia investigation.
And likewise, I take the same position.
Director Coates, on March 23rd, you testified to the Armed Services Committee that you were not aware of the President or White House personnel contacting anyone in the intelligence community with a request to drop the investigation into General Flynn. Yesterday, the Washington Post reported that you had been asked by the President to intervene with Director Comey to back off of the FBI's focus on General Flynn. Which one of those is accurate?
Senator, I will say once again, I'm not going to get into any discussion on that in an open hearing.
Both of them can't be accurate, Mr. Director. Mr. Director, as recently as April, you promised Americans that you would provide what you called a relevant metric for the number of law-abiding Americans who were swept up in the FISA 702 searches. This morning, you went back on that promise, and you said that even putting together a sampling, a statistical estimate, would jeopardize national security. I think that is a very, very damaging position to stake out. We're going to battle it out in the course of this because there are a lot of Americans who share our view that security and liberty are not mutually exclusive. We can have both. And you rejected that this morning. You went back on a pledge, and I think it is damaging to the public. Now let me...
Senator, could I answer the question?
Mr. Director, my time is short, and I want to ask you about one other 702.
Well, I would like to answer your question.
Briefly.
What I pledged to you in my confirmation hearing is that I would make every effort to try to find out why we were not able to come to a specific number of collection on U.S. persons. I told you I would consult with Admiral Rogers. I told you I would go to the National Security Agency to try to determine whether or not I was able to do that. I went out there, I talked to them, they went through the technical details. There were extensive efforts on the part of, I learned, on the parts of NSA to try to come to get you an appropriate answer. We were not
Mr.
able
Director,
to do that.
Respectfully, that's not what you said. You said, and I quote, "We are working to produce a relevant metric." Now let me go to my other question.
But we were not able to do it, to achieve it. So working to do it is different than doing it.
You told the American people that even a statistical sample would be jeopardizing America's national security. That is inaccurate and I think detrimental to the cause of ensuring we have both security and liberty. Now here's my other question. We are trying to sort out
Can the
who
witness
the
respond?
targets, who are the targets,
Apparently not.
who are the targets of a 702 investigation. Director Comey gave 3 different answers in a hearing a month ago. And I think it would be very helpful if you would tell us who, in fact, is a target of these investigations. I want to go after serious foreign threats, but we don't know as of now, with Director Comey having given 3 different answers, who the targets are. Mr. Director.
Well, I can't speak for former Director Clapper. Targets, as I understand, are non-U.S. persons, foreign individuals are the targets in terms 702 is directed and prohibited from directing targets on U.S. persons.
My time is up. I will tell you, Director Comey gave 3 answers. He finally said, I could be wrong, but I don't think so. I think it's confined to counterterrorism, to espionage, and finally he said he didn't think a diplomat could be targeted. So we need you all, in addition to protecting the liberties of the American people, to tell us who the targets are.
Well, I would like to respond to that by saying some of those targets are classified, highly classified.
I understand that.
Some of those targets, by revealing those names of those targets, release the methods that we use, and then it's turned against us, and could cost the lives or put some of our agents in
Director
significant...
Comey listed a number of targets, which is why there's confusion. He said that on the record. We need you to tell us on the record as well, consistent with protecting sources and methods.
Senator Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Coates, first let me thank you for a very cogent explanation of Section 702 and the fact that it cannot be used to target any person located in the United States, whether or not that person is an American. I think there's a lot of confusion about Section 702, and I appreciate your clear explanation this morning. I have a question for each of you that I would like to ask, and I want to start with Admiral Rogers. Admiral Rogers, did anyone at the White House direct you on how to respond today, or to were there discussions of executive privilege?
Have I asked the White House, is it their intent to invoke executive privilege? Yes. The answer I gave you today reflects my answer, no one else's.
Director Coates.
My answer is exactly the same.
I did never say I wasn't going to.
Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein.
I have not had any communications with the White House about invoking executive privilege today.
Director McCabe.
I have not had any conversations with the White House about executive privilege today either.
Admiral Rogers, in January, the FBI, the CIA, and NSA jointly issued an Intelligence Committee assessment on Russian involvement in the presidential elections. You've testified today that the IC relied in part on 702 authorities to support its conclusion that the Russians were involved in trying to influence the 2016 elections. Can you provide us with an update on NSA's further work in this area?
In terms of the Russian efforts, largely?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am. We continue to focus analytic and collection effort trying to generate insights as to what the Russians and others are doing, particularly with respect to efforts against U.S. infrastructure, U.S. processes like elections. We continue to generate insights on a regular basis. If my memory is right, I testified before the CICI. We did the open threat assessment, and in that hearing, which I think was the 11th of May, I reiterated we continue to see this similar activity that we identified and highlighted in the January report. Those trends continue. Much of that activity continues.
It's my understanding that President Obama requested the report that was issued in January. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. He asked for a consolidated single input from the IC as to the question, did the Russians or did they not attempt to influence the U.S. election process?
So could you explain the difference between the requests from President Obama for that unclassified assessment and the allegations that President Trump requested that you publicly report on whether or not there was any intelligence concerning collusion between the Russians and the members of the Trump campaign, President Trump's campaign?
So I apologize. I guess I'm confused by the question. Again, I'm not going to comment on any interactions with the president. I just don't feel that is appropriate. As I previously testified, I stand by that report.
Let me ask a broader question that I truly am trying to get a handle on, and that is, how does the intelligence community reach a decision on whether or not to comply with a request that comes from the President of the United States? Obviously, you report to the President of the United States, and I'm interested in what process you go through to decide whether or not to undertake a task that's been assigned by the President, by any President.
So off the top of my head, I would say we comply unless we have reason to believe that we are being directed to do something that is illegal, immoral, or unethical. In which case, we will not execute that.
Senator Heinrich.
Director McCabe, did Director Comey ever share details of his conversations with the President with you? In particular, did Director Comey say that the President had asked for his loyalty?
Sir, I'm not going to comment on conversations the Director may have had with the President. I know he's here to testify in front of you tomorrow. You'll have an opportunity to ask him those things then.
I'm asking you, did you have that conversation with Director Comey?
And I've responded that I'm not going to comment on those conversations.
Why not?
Because for two reasons. First, as I mentioned, I'm not in a position to talk about conversations that Director Comey may or may not have had with the President.
I'm not asking you that. I'm asking about conversations that you had with Director Comey.
And I think that those matters also begin to fall within the scope of issues being investigated by the special counsel, and it wouldn't be appropriate for me to comment on those today.
So you're not invoking executive privilege, and obviously it's not classified. This is the Oversight Committee. Why would it not be appropriate for you to share that conversation with us?
I think I'll let Director Comey speak for himself tomorrow in front of this committee.
We certainly look forward to that, but I think your unwillingness to share that conversation is an issue. Director Coates, you've said as well that it would be inappropriate to answer a simple question about whether the President asked for your assistance in blunting the Russia investigation. I don't care how you felt. I'm not asking whether you felt pressured. I'm simply asking, did that conversation occur?
And once again, Senator, I will say that I do believe it's inappropriate for me to discuss that in an open session.
You realize, and obviously this is not releasing any classified information, but you realize how simple it would simply be to say, no, that never happened. Why is it inappropriate, Director Coates?
I think conversations between the President and myself are, for the most part...
you seem to apply that standard selectively.
No, I'm not applying it selectively. I'm just saying I don't think it's appropriate.
You can clear an awful lot up by simply saying that never happened.
I do not share with the general public conversations that I have with the President or many of my colleagues within the administration that I believe should not be shared.
Well, I think your unwillingness to answer a very basic question speaks volumes.
It's not a matter of unwillingness,
Mr. Rosen, it is a matter of unwillingness.
It's a matter of how I share it and whom I share it to. And when there are ongoing investigations, I think it's inappropriate to...
So you don't think the American people deserve to know the answer to that question?
I think the investigations will determine that. And you're part of the
Mr. Rosenstein, did you know when you wrote the memo that was used as the primary justification for firing Director Comey that the administration would be using it as the primary justification?
Senator, as I know you're aware, I have there are a number of documents associated with me that are in the public record. The memorandum I wrote concerning Director Comey is in the public record. The order appointing the special counsel is in the public record. The press release I issued accompanying that order is in the public record, and a written version of the statement that I delivered to...
Were you aware that it would be the primary justification for his firing?
Pardon me, Senator, 100 United States senators and 435 congressmen is in the public record. I answered many questions in the closed briefings of the 100 senators.
But you're not answering this question.
And as I explained in those briefings, Senator, I support Mr. McCabe on this. We have a special counsel who is investigating and now responsible for the Russian
investigation. At this point, you filibuster better than most of my colleagues, so I'm going to move on to another question and say that given that the President stated that the FBI director, that his firing was in response to investigations into Russia, which he made very clear in Lester Holt's interviews, you've talked with both the President and the Attorney General about this firing. In light of Mr. Sessions' recusal, what role did the Attorney General play in that firing, and was it appropriate for him to write the letter that he wrote in this case?
I'm not trying to filibuster, Senator. I think I only took about 30 seconds, but I am not going to comment on that matter. I'm going to leave it to Special Counsel Mueller to determine whether that is within the scope of his investigation, and I believe that's appropriate for Mr. McCabe and me to do that.
Okay, so you can't comment on recusal and what's in inside and outside the scope of that recusal.
Mr. Chairman, we ought to let the witness answer the question.
Second the motion. So, I'm sorry, your specific question is what's in the recusal. And my understanding is the recusal you're referring to is also in the public record, and I believe it speaks for itself.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Blunt.
Director McCabe, on May the 11th, when you were before this committee, you said that there has been no effort to impede the Russian investigation. Is that still your position?
It is, but let me clarify, Senator. I think you're referring to the exchange that I had with Senator Rubio. And my understanding, at least my intention in providing that answer, was whether or not the firing of Director Comey had had a negative impact on our investigation. And my response was then and is now that the FBI investigated and continues to investigate, and now, of course, under the rubric of the special counsel, the Russia investigation in a appropriate and unimpeded way before Director Comey was fired and since he's been gone.
Well, I think as I recall that conversation, it was a discussion about whether there were plenty of resources, whether the funding was adequate, and what you were reported to have said, I haven't looked at the exact transcript, but I have looked at the news article, was that you were aware of no effort to impede the Russian investigation.
We did talk about resource issues and whether or not we had asked for additional resources to pursue the investigation. I believe my response at the time was we had not asked for additional resources and that we had adequate resources to pursue the investigation. That was true then, is still true today.
And you would characterize your quote as no effort to impede the Russian investigation as still accurate?
That's correct.
On the 702 issue, when the FBI wants to follow up on or pursue a U.S. person in or outside the United States, what court do you go to get that to happen? Do you go to the FISA court as well?
If we are seeking collection under 702?
No, if you're, how do you relate to 702? Do you ever seek collection under 702?
Sure, yes we do. So so let me step back just a minute. So of course, when the FBI seeks electronic surveillance collection on a U.S. person, we go to the FISA court and get a Title I FISA order to do so. If we have an open, full investigation on a foreign person in a foreign place, and the collection is for the purpose of collecting foreign intelligence, we can nominate that person, or that, as we refer to it internally, the selector, whether it's an email address or that sort of thing. We can nominate that for 702 coverage. We convey that nomination to the NSA, and they pursue the coverage under their authority.
But you would be the person that would pursue coverage for a U.S. person either here or outside the United States?
That's correct, Senator.
You mean the FBI?
We are the U.S. person agency. That's right.
And Admiral Rogers, Senator Feinstein mentioned that last year 1,139 U.S. persons were, the phrase we're using now, unmasked for some purpose. Is that a number you agree with?
It's in the 2016 ODNI generated transparency report. From memory, the number is actually 1,934 from memory. It could be
sorry.
wrong, but
so I misheard, but 1,900. What would the number have been in 2015?
to be honest, I don't know. I'd have to take that one for the record. I do know that we didn't start with the transparency commitment that we made partnering with the DNI. We didn't start that until the latter end of 2015. So the 2015 data that's been published as a matter of public record is a subset of the entire calendar year. 2016 is the first calendar year where we have published all the data for the entire
Director
year.
Coates, do you have any information on that?
Well, I've seen the number. I don't recall what it was, and I just asked my staff.
I guess what I'm asking, and you can take this for the record, is was there an increase in 2016? Did you have significantly more requests based on your subset in 15 happen in 16 than you had had?
I don't know off the top of my head. We'll take it for the record, but I will say this: 702 collection has continued. The amount of total collection has increased generally every year. It's more and more impactful for us. It generates more and more value.
And when 702 generates information that would indicate there was a U.S. person involved in criminal activity, what do you do with that information?
If we report it to either to DOJ and the FBI, because we're not a criminal organization.
And what do you do if you get that information at DOJ, Mr. Rosenstein? Information from a 702 collection that clearly indicates there's a crime involving a U.S. person.
I hesitate only because that's actually an FBI issue, so I would
All right.
defer to Mr. McCabe.
Mr. McCabe?
Sure. So we take that referral, and if that's a U.S. person, we begin to build an investigation aiming towards Title I FISA collection.
With adequate protections for U.S. persons and that entire
course.
chain of transmission of material.
That's right.
Thank you, Chairman.
Senator King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First on 702, like Senator Feinstein, I want to express my support for this important tool for our intelligence agencies. I do have a concern, which we can discuss perhaps in closed session, about the process by which American names which are incidentally collected are then queried. I'm concerned by the distinction between query and search and where we run into the Fourth Amendment. It strikes me as bootstrapping to say we collected